Hello everyone, it's Matt from Akuma Mods, back again with a tutorial video that had been requested by several people. So today we're going to be looking at slimming down a Raspberry Pi. For this specific video, it's going to be a Raspberry Pi 4. So it might differ if you're going to do it on a 3B, a 3A, a 2, a 0, whatever it may be. But this specific model is a 4 gig Pi 4. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, I'm just going to go over the tools that I have here. So you're going to want a pair of pliers. You don't need ones these big. I do have a smaller set here, but as you can see, they're not working very well. So we're just going to use these in place of that. So the smaller the better, obviously. We're going to use some solder. You could also use some flux paste or even some braided wire to remove the solder. Doesn't matter. You can use whatever you want. It's not the end of the world. We're just going to use basic solder, and we're going to use it as best as we can. Obviously, you need your Raspberry Pi or whatever board you're slimming down. I highly suggest a heat gun of some sort. This system that I have is just out of the shot here, but it's a triple system. So it's a desoldering, soldering, and a soldering iron. So, plus a heat gun and some other stuff that's included in it. So it's actually more or less like a 4-in-1. But I use a heat station, so a heat gun and the soldering iron. Those are the only two main things I'm going to be working with. I usually have my soldering iron set at about 400 degrees just to get some solder flow on there. Again, you can adjust that to your liking and whatever type of solder you're going to be using. This we're using right now is 22 gauge. So the reason why I use a smaller gauge is because for the GPIO pins, I don't want huge globs or anything like that. It's not the end of the world if you guys do have globs, but you know, just the less you have to work with, the better it will be for you. Last but not least, you're going to want a stand of some sort. So here we have a mini Panavise. I think these go for about 50 bucks. And this thing's great. It's got an adjustable arm here, and it's got an adjustable arm here to tilt it back and forth, or left to right, whatever you want to decide which way you're going. So that's pretty much it. So like I said, I do the 400 degrees on the soldering iron, and when we get to the heat gun, I'm going to be doing 480 degrees. So we're going to put this back for right now. I'm going to grab my little tinner, excuse me, and then we're going to go ahead and load the Pi up on here. Now, if you're going to be using a Panavise mount, you got to be careful not to crush the USB-C connectors or the HDMI connectors. Those are very, very important to keep on there and keep them very well in case you're gonna use them. If you're not using them, then by all means you guys can do whatever you want with it. So what I usually do is I'll go halfway through the board and I'll stick it on the second HDMI for this model. Again, it may vary depending on the model that you're desoldering here. But you want to try and get it in there as tight as possible so there's not moving around or anything like that. And we're just going to lock this up as good as we can and get it all in position. So another extra item you can have on your list is a pair of flush cutters. I'm just going to use this to get rid of the Ethernet nubs. What's going to happen with that, no matter what you do, is when you're desoldering this with the heat gun, that plastic is going to melt on the board. So unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have some scarring on the board. It's not anything bad. It's just the plastic adhering to the board, and it's really hard to get it off. It takes a lot of bit of scraping, but I don't suggest scraping it off. Just kind of rub it down with some alcohol or whatever it may be, and then go from there. And so yeah. Let's get into it. So what I'm going to do, obviously I'm going to tin my tip. I'm going to take off a good amount of solder here. I'm just going to burn that off. And We're going to tin our tip. Put it in there. And what I'm basically going to do is we're going to work on the front of the Pi. So we have the USB 2.0, the USB 3.0 on this model, and the Ethernet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reflow each and every pins. What this will do, because these are a different type of solder, it's kind of a heavier duty solder that's on these Pis that requires a much hotter heat than what I'm using in my hand right now. 400 degrees, as you can see, just kind of melts it like butter, so it's not really necessary for it. But in order for it to transition into the the unleaded solder, we're basically going to keep it at 400 degrees so we could get it all in there. Okay. And at this point, yeah, it's going to look kind of a mess. And on this part, it's not the end of the world. As long as we get solder on all the connections, it doesn't have to look pretty. You could have some globs on there. I kind of have them touching it sometimes. That might make it a little bit easier for you. Just so we can get them out all in one shot. And what you're doing is you're basically just retinning all the little pins that are on here. So like on the Ethernet here, there's these little side pins. I know it's kind of hard for you guys to see in this angle. I don't really have the greatest of cameras, so my apologies. But on the sides, there's like, it's not a connector. It's more or less a, it's like a holder for the Ethernet jack to hold itself in the board while you solder it down. So so that's something you want to make sure that you tin. There's 2 on each side of the USB hubs, and then 1 on each side of the Ethernet hub. So what you're going to do now is, now that we're all done tinning everything, and you can go ahead and tin the GPIO pins if you want. That's completely up to you. Right now we're just going to work on the USB part and go from there pretty much. One last thing that I forgot to mention is a desoldering pump. I highly suggest this style of desoldering pump. This one has seen better days. I probably have to get a new one. If you have a automatic desoldering pump, which I do for that, you can use that, but this works perfectly fine. I do this stuff all by hand. So this model is the ZD108 desoldering pump. This thing is insanely powerful. So highly suggest that one. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to heat up our heat gun. We're going to let that get up to temperature. And it gets up there pretty quick if you have an automatic station going on. So right now we're already at like 400 degrees, but obviously even though it says 400 degrees, it's probably not at that. It's probably like 250, 270, somewhere around there. You guys can even see a little bit of the air flowing out of there too. And yes, that is not a visual issue. You are seeing my lights flicker because this is a pretty powerful heat gun, and what I had my system all set up on with my LED shop light is not the greatest for power flowing, so but it does work. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take one of the tips of the pliers. Again, I highly suggest a smaller pair just to get in there, and we're going to just stick it into one of the USBs. Now, if you're trying to save these USB hubs, you're going to want something wider like this so you can rock it back and forth, so you can grab it and rock it. That's basically what we're going to do. So I'm going to try and do it with this one. and see if we can salvage this USB hub. I don't suggest this because this does take a lot more time to get it right and make sure that everything is good afterwards. But if you have the time and patience to do so, then by all means, go ahead and do it. Now, you guys may or may not see some smoke. What that mostly is this heat gun burning off the extra flux from the solder. Don't be worried about it. I've had these boards. I can probably sit this heat gun here for a good 30 minutes before this board starts having any issues with the pinholes for the solder joints. So you're just going to have to reflow back and forth until you start seeing a jelly-like, and then what you're going to do is you're going to rock it back and forth and try and get it off. It's going to take a little bit of time, but once you start getting it, it'll come off like butter. I guarantee it. So we're doing it a little differently, but I guarantee it'll come right off. This is going to be the most of the video you guys are going to be watching, is me desoldering these things. These take the longest out of anything. So you're going to hear it start creaking and cracking when you're moving it back and forth. That tells you that you're in the right way, and that's where you need to go. So there we go. It's already starting to let loose. All right, there we go. There's one down. So now that the board's already preheated up, this one will come out a lot quicker and a lot easier. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can actually pull it from the actual USB part if you're not worried about salvaging these dual USB ports. Now, the USB 3.0s are a little bit more tricky because they do have a lot more pins. If you want, you can start at the center of the board, and that way you can work to either your left or your right, and that'll make sure that the pins are flowing properly on everything. So there we go. There it's letting loose. You can hear it. You guys can hear that creaking. Now, again, this one, like I said, the little nubs that are on there, those are probably going to burn onto the board. So it's not the end of the world. It's just plastic. It's not going to affect anything. As long as you clear up your contacts where the pins were, everything will be perfectly fine. Now, this one we might be able to get away with minimal scarring on the board, and there we go. So there we go. There's the USBs removed already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my heat gun back, so that way it goes down in heat and we're not having to worry about it. We're going to let this cool off a little bit. If you have some sort of item that can cool it down, a fan, whatever it may be, you can go ahead and utilize that. The other thing that we can start doing is we can start desoldering the pinholes. Now, again, this is something that I kind of do as an extra step. It's not necessarily needed. As long as you clean up the pinhole areas and nothing is touching each other for the solder, you're good as golden. You don't have to worry about that. I just personally clean them up in case anybody who's using these boards decides to rewire them or hardwire, whatever they want to do, or if they want to even put it back to a normal board, they can go ahead and do that. So that's one of the good things about salvaging these USB hubs, is I can give this to whoever this board goes to, and if they feel like, oh, this is not working out, I just wanted the board back to where it goes, I can go ahead and give them these, and as long as they have some minor soldering skills, they can go ahead and resolder this all back together. No problem. The GPIOs, obviously we can't salvage those, but you can buy these strips for really, really cheap. I think they come in like packs of 10s for maybe $2, if that. And then you'll just have to clip one of them to get the 4-prong that's over here. So, yeah. Alright, so now that we have this all set up, I'm going to go ahead and desolder all the holes that I possibly can. What we're going to do is we're going to start with the bigger holes. These are the holes that held the USBs in place. We're going to dig our soldering iron inside that hole, and then we're going to make sure that it liquefies, and then we're just going to take it out. And there you go. You can see the hole right through. That's why I said this thing is far better than most people think it is. If you need to add some solder to it, it's not the end of the world. You can go ahead and do that. But that's the basic gist of it. You just go through and get all that stuff out. Now, I'm not going to do the little ones as of yet. I'll show you how to do those ones in a little bit once we get to it. I'm just going to go through and do all the bigger ones first and clean those up as best as we can. Again, you might have to go through it once or twice, maybe even 3 or 4 times, depending on how good your solder is getting in there or how good your desoldering pump is. Again, I highly suggest this model over like the smaller ones, because the smaller ones, they just don't have enough power to eject that solder out of the pump. And yes, you will get a lot of that. So just be aware that when you guys are desoldering these bigger ones, you're going to get a lot of extra solder in this pump. So you may have to clean it out once or twice after doing the bigger ones. And then once you do the singular ones, they're pretty easy to do afterwards, because they're just really, really small pinholes, and there's not a lot of solder taken up in them. So as you can tell, I sit there for a little bit and let it just kind of rock in there. And that's basically what I do. And again, we're at 400 degrees, so we're not really killing the board in any way, shape, or form. Again, you can raise or lower it depending on what type of solder you're using. Each and every solder is different, and the properties that can take the temperatures will vary. So you just have to adjust accordingly. Now, with these ones that are kind of hard to get solder out of, because you're going to come across that a lot on these boards, especially on the GPIO side. They tend to over solder these things, and the solder like coagulates in a certain way to where it just stays inside of the pinhole. So you got one or two choices. One, you can skip it, or two, you can get the solder out. By doing that, you have to use the heat gun. So what I usually do is, again, the reason why I use this base is I'll turn this on its side, I'll hit it with the heat gun from this side, and then I'll take the desoldering pump and I'll just suck it out from that side. And that'll make sure that you have a clean and clear board as best as possible. Again, it's not necessarily required, but if you really, really want a clean board, that's probably the best idea to go with that route. And then obviously you need some sort of an electronics cleaner, isopropyl alcohol, whatever you guys have on hand to clean your electronics, because we want to clean up all of the flux that's on there. You guys can probably see some of it. It's like brownish almost. So that's the other thing that you can do. All right, let's keep going here. Let's see how good we can get. Maybe this board will work with me. Highly doubt that. Yeah, so there's one that's going to be a problem right now. Now, again, I wouldn't waste too much time with the soldering iron on these smaller ones, because it's just going to be so much easier to get them with a desoldering gun. Or I'm sorry, the heat gun. Again, if you have an automatic desoldering gun, something of this nature, this is all automatic. So my system uses this. This is a vacuum line, and basically it's a soldering iron, but it has a pump that shoots the stuff inside of this little chamber here. So you just press it and it'll go vroom, vroom, vroom. You can use that too. This one is not that great, so that's why I've kind of used the standard desoldering pump. Again, it's completely up to you. I just did this because, well, this is more budget friendly than a desoldering gun is, for most people. Plus, trying to get a desoldering gun in a short amount of time is kind of hard in sometimes. So a desoldering pump is always around at your local Micro Center, Fry's, if you have them, a Radio Shack, or any electronics store that has like solder and things like that. You can always find something like this. If not, worst comes to worst, you can order it on Amazon. So, yeah, the next thing we're going to move on to is the GPIO pins and the 3.5 millimeter jack. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 pins on the jack. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move this board a little bit back, and we're going to clamp the USB side. So that way we have access to the GPIOs. Go ahead and tin our tip. Now these are very, very easy to get out, for the most part, I should say. I haven't really had too much of an issue with them lately, but you know, there are those boards that, you know, they won't work very well. And again, doing it like this, reflowing it, for the pins, it's not really necessary. If you bump up your temps on your soldering iron, you can probably get away without reflowing it. I just reflow it just to make it a lot easier on me. And that way I can get fresh flux and solder on my my GPIO pins. So let's go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll pull them off. Literally pull them off one by one. Let's go through and check them all. And just expect, excuse me, just expect some of these to stick in there. It's just going to happen. So for this one, since, like I said, you want to use a smaller pair of pliers, I'm going to actually use a pair of tweezers, because I need to get in there, and I need to get in to a very small space, and those are a little bit too big. So I highly suggest getting a smaller pair of pliers if you have them. And again, you're just going to listen for the creak, and there you go. Pull one out, put it down. Now, not all of these are going to pull out right away. They may need some coercing. So sometimes what I do is I'll push them up and then pull them through, and that'll work sometimes. But if they're just not budgeting, then just move on. And what we're going to do with those ones is we're going to come around with the heat gun, and we're going to remove them that way, because they're going to come out like butter. Now, I know the other thing that, you know, you guys might be asking, well, why can't I just use the heat gun to take all these out at once? You can try and do that, but I'll be honest, I've been doing this for a little while, and it's just not as effective, in my opinion, to do it that way. The reason being is, while they all are attached to a plastic piece that holds all the GPIOs in, it's not that great. So I don't really suggest it. Looks like we're loosening it up here. Make sure that all of your stuff is tight if you're doing this. So as you can see, this one is not budging at all. Even if I'm pushing up, not doing anything. So what we're just going to do, move on to the next one. If the next one doesn't do that, then move on to the next. Just keep going. Don't stop. Ain't no stopping me now. Again, this part is a little bit more tedious. And, you know, going back to the whole heat gun thing, you can try and use the heat gun, but I'm just going to tell you right now, because it has that plastic piece on the top, so the plastic piece holds all these GPIOs in, and they just solder them all in one shot. So the issue that you might run into with a heat gun is that you're going to melt the plastic all over the top of the GPIOs. So I don't personally like that. I like to have my boards looking as nice as I possibly can. And I have yet to find something that'll remove plastic very well without damaging the board. I can probably use some acetone, but I'm a little worried that it's going to destroy the board or eat through the screen printing process. So I usually don't go that route. I just pull one by one, and by the time I get down to the last 2 or 3, the whole piece of plastic will pull down on it, and it'll pull away from the entire pie. So and again, if you're worried about heat on these boards, like I said, I'll be honest, I've been doing this for a little while now, and I haven't had any issues with heat in these boards. So they are pretty resilient. It takes a lot to destroy one of these boards, let me tell you. Not saying that I haven't destroyed a board, you know, in my earlier times doing this, but you know, it's really, really hard. You have to sit there for a long period of time in order to get that out there and get it all messed up. So just FYI, it's very, very hard. Best way to get these GPIOs out, just wiggle it. Wiggle it just a little bit. I want to see you wiggle it. Okay, enough of that. No karaoke for you. And if you want these ones that were problematic for you, you could always come back around and try them again. Maybe they've loosened up a little bit. Who knows? Oh, there we go. Again, for those ones, I usually try and wiggle them and then push them up. And sometimes they'll come loose, sometimes they won't. It happens. This one's actually going to be very good for me. So now what we're doing, usually this plastic piece comes out, but since there must be a lot of solder on the other side, this plastic piece is not coming out of here. So we're just going to move on to the other 4 GPIOs. Now these ones we didn't re-tin, so you could see how easy these ones come out. These ones don't really need to be re-tinned. They come out very, very easily. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's the board. Now, like I said, what you can do is you can go through one by one and just suck out all the solder. I usually do that. I'll go through one by one and just try and suck out as much as I can with the desoldering pump. And then for the ones that are going to be a little bit more finicky, stuff that gets stuck in here, mostly you're going to see that on the USB 3.0 side, and the GPIOs kind of so-so sometimes. You know, that's that's what you're going to run into. So just be aware that, you know, obviously you're going to have some issues. So just use your heat gun if you have a problem with that. Okay, so moving on to the 3.5 millimeter jack. What we're going to do is we're going to take some sort of piece. Usually you can take your pliers, your tweezers, whatever you have. I also have these little like pry tools. Those will work too. So I'll just stick it inside the barrel, and then we're just going to desolder all of these pins and just kind of rock them back and forth. Sorry if you guys are hearing my daughter in the background. And again, you're listening for like that creak. And again, if you wanted to, you know, just do this a lot quicker, you can probably hit it with the heat gun and it'll come off in one shot, just like the USBs. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. Again, you got to let it heat up for a little bit, and then you can. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm pulling down on the back side of this. So what's going to happen is these 3 pins on the back side are going to pull out first. And then once you get that, then just rock it back forward, and you'll get the 2 pins on the front here. So we're going to go ahead and use our heat gun. We're going to heat it up a little bit. And once you see it start liquefying, then you should feel it start ripping apart. And I just kind of keep rocking it back and forth just to loosen up the solder and everything. Okay, so we're starting to get a little bit loose here. And there we go. I don't know where it went. There it is. So again, that's kind of salvaging this, so we can still keep that part. So again, that's the nice thing about using specific tools with this, is you can salvage all these parts to put it back together if anything happens, or if you want to test something out. You don't have any extra USB 3.0s. This one is very hard to come by. So really the thing that you need to look out for is on these USB ports, on the grippers that are on these 4 holes, you have to just make sure that there's enough solder that's off of them. So what you just do is you just take your soldering iron and just kind of flow it off the tip, and then just tin it again. And then once you get it off there, then it should just pop right back in. So, and then just avoid trying to get the plastic as well. So basically we're going to try and clean these up as best as we can. You could also use solder wick for this. That's a good tool that a lot of people use. I personally am not a big solder wick person. I know some people live and die by that. You know, I am the solder and solder flux and stuff like that. I live by that. So you're going to meet those people that are like that. So again, if you wanted to go ahead and redo that, you can go ahead and just stick that back in there and resolder it down if you have any issues with anything. So, but for the most part, that's it. That's it. That's all you need to do. So removing this part, as you can see, there's solder stuck inside there. So this one's going to be a little bit more tricky. We might have to actually like use some cutters, the side cutters, and get that off of there. Let's see if we can. Because the solder is just going to come up on that. So that's one of the nicer things. So you're just going to break it off piece by piece, basically. And of course, when you're doing this, just be careful, because you know you can destroy the board, or not really destroy it, but you can mark it up, and then you know there can be scrape marks on the grounding plane, and when you go to solder things, it can lead into there, and then you're just going to have a whole other disaster. So just be careful. As you can see, you see all that extra solder that they put on there? That is insane. Look at that. Look at all that extra solder that's underneath there. That is always like that with those GPIO pins. They put so much solder in those things. If you guys ever have a contact problem with the solder, with the GPIOs, I'm sorry, you know, that's almost impossible. I've never ever heard of that because of how much solder that they put in these things. But anyway, for those guys that are probably going to ask, well, what about the display connector, I'm sorry, the camera connector and the display connector? So those ones, if you're going to desolder that stuff, be very, very careful, especially the display connector, because that is directly connected to the SD card. So you know, when you take off the camera one, it's not too bad. Nothing really too important is on there, but again, you got to be very, very careful in removing both of these, especially the display connector, because if you rip a trace on any one of these, you can pretty much consider your board dead. I can't tell you how many times I've killed a board just by trying to remove that alone. But what's nice about that is, like, you can see how low of a profile you can go even further. But let's say you don't want to go that way, and you want it slim, but you're worried about what I said, you know, destroying the entire card. What you can do is just take some snips and then snip it down to size and get it level with your mini HDMIs or your USB-C or whatever's on the board that you're using. Just get it on par with that. So you could just cut it up and that'll be fine. I don't suggest using a Dremel. It's more messy than what it is. This will be much, much easier to use. And if you hear it crunching, it's not the end of the world. It can still be, you know, taken apart and everything like that. You just got to make sure that none of the pins that are on here, because they come in from both sides. So basically you have pins and then you have pins, and they come up together, and then you wedge something in between it and they make a connection. So what you got to just be diligent about is making sure that those pins are not connecting to each other and grounding out. That is another bad thing that you got to worry about. So if you guys don't want to do that, that's perfectly fine. This will work just fine in most board setups. You can get away with this sizing perfectly fine. Again, if you need it even slimmer, be very, very, very careful about it. I cannot stress that enough, especially the display connector. That is probably the biggest one that everybody destroys, and they don't realize when they destroy it, they're actually destroying some of the pins that are connecting on this, and it just makes the whole thing useless. So just be aware when you're doing that. So again, I'm not going to go through the rest of this. You guys pretty much got the gist of it. What you can do, like I said, is just go one by one and just desolder each and every single one of them if you absolutely need to. If not, you could just make sure that all of this stuff is flowed down and it's perfectly flat. So kind of like what this looks like. So this is perfectly fine. You guys can get away with that and not have an issue. But again, if you're using this to resolder anything, you want to get rid of all the solder that you possibly can. And then obviously you get an electronics cleaner and clean up the board, and then you'll be perfectly fine. It'll look like a brand new stock board right out of the factory. It'll look like nothing has even been done to it. So I hope this tutorial, I guess, helped you guys out. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and where's my thing here? Leave them below. Leave them below. There we go. Leave them below the video, and I'll try and answer your questions as best as I can. If you guys like the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, guys, happy gaming.